My name's Brian. This is Bare Metal. For today's video, I wanted to focus on one of my favorite subgenres, dark fantasy. I've been a fan of a lot of things that could fall into that category for years now. The Soul series, Game of Thrones, Baldur's Gate, Neo. I've also been appreciating art and literature that touches on darker, more fantastical themes as well. One of my favorites, the late great Harlan Ellison, falls into that niche, though it's usually more modern in its settings, as does most of the work of Clark Ashton Smith, a dated but still interesting author who paved the way for a lot of modern fiction, even impressing the racist king of cosmic horror himself, H.P. Lovecraft. On top of all of that, a certain big-name video essayist on YouTube inspired me to buy a copy of Vermis, an art book for a grimy RPG that doesn't actually exist, and to try out Fear and Hunger, which is a horrible, awful, absolutely amazing RPG Maker game with eldritch themes, dark implications, and gruesome consequences for failure. These last two things are really gritty. Sludgy is the word that comes to mind. Interacting with them makes you feel like you're living in a heavy metal album cover. And there's something about the way they pull it off that is so rare and aesthetically powerful that it's almost addictive. It makes you want to go out and find more, because no other media feels like gritty, unforgiving, dark fantasy media. Like, this isn't the kind of dark fantasy that lives in quotes. It's not your grandmama's dark fantasy. This isn't Hogwarts or High Hrothgar. It's raw, grungy, sickly atmosphere. You can feel that the people who made it are also using it themselves as an emotional outlet or a way to talk about the world. It's the real stuff. The good stuff. So I decided to cave in to this newfound addiction and look for more titles on Steam that could help sate it. I wanted to find hidden gems, some things from indie developers that were bringing their own dark artistic flair and perspective to game development. I ended up walking away with a handful of games I had a blast playing, and which I think you'll enjoy finding out about too. The first game I want to talk about is Mortal Sin. This is a first-person action horror roguelike made and published by a single person, Nikola Todorovic. This basically plays like a mashup between Dark Souls, Oblivion, and Doom. It's swords, blood, and folk metal, and it has the aesthetic charm of a Black Sabbath poster, also utilizing a lot of remarkable visuals. Image thresholding, grungy textures, and the use of complementary colors really drive home the dark and heavy look. This one is bloody, gory, hack-and-slash madness combined with interesting progression mechanics and solid procedural generation. You play as the Struggler, a warrior tasked with conquering 3 zones: the dungeon, the cave, and the forest. It's only when you get past these that you can make it to a final area known as the Maw of Sin. I'll be honest with you, I don't really know what that means. I didn't make it to the forest, let alone the Maw of Sin, so I can't tell you why we want to get there so bad, or what the final boss looks like, or what getting there even really entails other than a lot of fighting. What I do know is that this game's story is very responsive to your choices. Depending on which zone you complete first, your experience in the second and third zones will change, including the items you find and the enemies you face. You'll have to do a lot of fighting to get there, and to be perfectly clear, it's not a great combat system. Playing on default settings with the Xbox controller feels slow and awkward in spite of official support. You have a limited toolkit which allows you to bash, block, and kick your way through the game. The game tries to disincentivize button mashing by giving you a damage bonus for switching up your combos. And while that's a good feature in theory, it ends up incentivizing the mashing of 3 buttons in a cycle, instead of 1 button. Dismembering limbs is a big part of the game, and usually the best way to solve any given problem is just to get to chopping until there's no part of the zombie left to chop off. Enemy types can get old pretty quickly. It seemed that the exact time it took for me to get tired of fighting the basic zombie was when they managed to introduce a new guy, like a wizard. So, with all of that being said, despite being a bit slow and clunky at times, this game is really fun to look at and a blast to play. Every run gives you a bit more experience, which goes towards unlocking new classes, each with their own unique abilities. By the time you get access to the second one, the Monk build, the game starts to feel a little more fluid and responsive, and you've already encountered those new enemy types that make it more engaging. The Monk gets a roundhouse kick, and that alone was a game changer for me. It made it so much more of a fun experience. In fact, whereas I'd hit a wall with the basic Struggler class, the roundhouse carried me all the way to and through the first boss, the Baron of Sin. This is a big guy that loves to charge and melee while a million minions swarm you from all sides. And that new ability basically trivialized the entire fight. I did end up unlocking a third class, the Paladin, but didn't actually try it before moving on to the next game in my list. But hey, I gotta give you something to go experience for yourself, right? Overall, Mortal Sin is definitely a fun time, and I can't say I played anything that looks or feels quite like it. It's $20 on Steam, which doesn't really feel on par with the experience if I'm being brutally honest. But it's a price I can justify by saying support independent creators. They're awesome, and the world needs a whole lot more games like this in it. I'll definitely come back to it if I ever have free time, so there's a chance I'll show off more of it here on the channel. But check this game out for yourself if you can get it on sale or if you have money to burn. It's worth a look if nothing else. There Is No Light is a 2D hack-and-slash pixel action adventure from Hype Train. Surprise, surprise, There Is No Light is dark. It's spooky, it's unique, and it is damn good looking. This is arguably one of the most visually stunning games on this list, and the amount of care that went into making it look as good as it does is very, very clear. But what is even more stunning to me is that it has the bones to back up those good looks. This is a game that boasts a 25-hour storyline, dozens of enemy types, over 1,000 entries of written dialogue, a karma system that keeps track of your actions, a skill tree, 4 weapon types, a dozen different kinds of abilities you can attach to each weapon, and more that I probably haven't even discovered yet. For a game with 500 reviews on Steam, this puppy is more fleshed out and engaging than a lot of AAA titles on the market right now. Part of that is probably due to its nature as a very story-driven game, and a game which seems to succeed in telling its story well. You play as a nameless hero whose child was taken by the Great Hand, a new god followed by the subterranean survivors of a great global cataclysm. But this new god is not entirely benevolent. Every so often, the Hand demands child sacrifices to serve him as warriors in the army on the surface, and yours happen to be one of the ones chosen for the latest round. The story that follows is one that sees you fight through unfathomable terrors as you try to reunite with your family. There's more that I'll say about the story later, but I just want to give a general overview of all the good things that this game does. First, I can't emphasize enough how pretty this game is. There's a certain ability that the level designers have to really carve out the tiny details that make an environment feel busy and lively, and just as easily feel cold, bleak, and desolate. From ancient train stations to cannibal camps to divine underground lakes, there's no shortage of brief but richly designed locations to get lost in all the details of. Combat is fluid, and while I wasn't able to try out all of the weapons before moving on, I get the sense that even just using the sword the game starts you with can be a satisfying enough experience to want to use it for the entire game. And this game is satisfying to play. It's really fun. I could spend hours in this world, and the little bit of this game that I played through just to get a feel for it actually ended up inspiring me to do a full playthrough. You'll be able to see it on the channel soon. But like all games, this one isn't perfect. About 8 minutes into my first run, I encountered a progress-stopping bug that made me have to reboot and pick up from the last checkpoint. When that happened, I was expecting to have a much worse time than I did. Aside from that, I didn't run into any technical issues. All of my other gripes with the game tended to be about the story, actually. The plot is also a rough-cut gem. It seems to struggle with knowing what kind of storytelling it actually wants to do. The introduction to the game relies a lot on visual storytelling, primarily slideshow-style cutscenes that help convey the main character's background. Because that's how this world is introduced to you, it seems like that's basically the kind of storytelling that this game wants to do and is going to do from that point on. But then, you're dropped into zones with characters full of dialogue bubbles, and Samedi, a snarky devilish character who seems eager to info dump everything you need to know about the world and how to play the game on you. That pacing switch up left me wondering what kind of game I was actually getting myself into. It turned out to be a really good one, but all of those little inconsistencies made the experience a little strange at the start. My last gripe about the game is that, full disclosure, it has a lot of religious undertones that can get a bit overbearing at times. And it's very intentional, obviously, and it can be weird to sit through as someone who doesn't care about that kind of commentary generally. I'm not religious at all, it's just not in my background. I'm one of them heathens, just so you know who you're watching. And those undertones start to turn into overtones fairly quickly, like when literally every NPC in one area of the game uses the word Messiah non-stop. Your Grim Reaper slash sidekick slash puppet master, Samedi, his name literally means Sabbath in French, which is pretty metal, yeah, but they aren't really hiding the religious references. So if that's not your jam for whatever reason, just know that going into it. Overall, I'd say this game is really fun. It's probably one of the games I've had the most fun playing this year. Some of the highlights for me include a Dark Link style battle with yourself, your shadow self, that cannibal camp I mentioned before, and the little room after that boss fight in that section, which had one of the funniest encounters I'd seen in a video game, probably ever. It really is a charming title, and probably the game I'm most excited to return to on this list, if you couldn't tell. Tied perhaps with the next one. Dread Delusion is another first-person game, and this one is more of a psychedelic take on an RPG. It's a very noisy-looking, splotchy, visually loud game that uses contrasting colors and low-poly textures to accent its open world. I've heard this called a Morrowind-like, and as someone who has never played Morrowind, I can't really speak to that. It does remind me a lot of Oblivion in some ways. But if nothing else, it looks and feels like a game from previous console generations, albeit with an LSD Dream emulator style twist. Steam goes so far as to lump this into an acid fantasy bundle. And honestly, if you came up to me and said, "This game hurts my eyeballs and it hardly counts as dark fantasy, why the hell would you recommend this to me? I played it, I'm unsatisfied, and I need LASIK now." Trust me, I totally get it. But I do think that there is an aesthetic charm to this game that earns it a unique place in this list. Call it a purposeful ugliness about it. And I think what makes this game interesting is that in spite of its peyote flavored look, it manages to retain its dark and gritty nature. You start off the game as Prisoner 17, a character whose backstory you get to choose. One which, no matter what, leads you to commit a heinous enough act to land you in the jail that is your starting location. You're held captive by a group known as the Apostatic Union, a governmental authority in the process of wresting control of much of the starting island back from a band of rogue mercenaries, the Dark Star Company. The Union decides to give you a chance at redemption, offering you greater freedom in exchange for service. You have to hunt down the leader of this group, Vela Kalos. And while that proves to be a little harder than anticipated, the journey becomes worthwhile as you track her through a visually stunning landscape packed to the brim with interesting characters. Now, with all of this game's praises out of the way, I think it's time to watch the party die and talk about what's not so great about it. I mean, there's not much. This game is generally a fun experience, but combat can be a bit slow and janky. The control scheme is kind of uncomfortable to use. The pacing can be a bit slow at times. And obviously, if you don't like the way it looks, then it's really not going to appeal to you no matter how good the gameplay is. But this game is one I'd recommend to anyone looking for a story-heavy game with an open world. One that doesn't shy away from gruesome, absurd, or uncomfortable ideas. And as long as you like or can get used to the striking visual elements of this game, it's one that offers a lot of playtime and satisfaction. Last but not least, Perennial Order is a 2D twin-stick boss rush game with roguelike elements and a Souls-like plot and atmosphere. It's controller recommended and is available on Xbox, but it's also on Steam if you, for some reason, want to suffer and try it with a mouse and keyboard. You play as a perennial knight, an undead servant of the natural world tasked with defending the woods and the humans trapped within it from impending blight. The dark, gloomy, woody atmosphere gives this game a really interesting aesthetic. According to the store page and the developers themselves, it's inspired by Dark Souls and Princess Mononoke, and it has a very charming narrative and memorable characters. So with that being said, let's rip the band-aid off. This is also the game I had the least fun playing among everything on this list. And don't get me wrong, I do want to be generous. I don't think it's due to any shortfall of the game. I put about 2 hours into this one total, and I think to really give a good measure of it, you'd have to give it more of a chance than I honestly had time for in a single session. What I can say is that based on the little bit of Perennial Order that I got in, I did not personally enjoy what the game was trying to sell me at all. See, like I mentioned before, this is essentially a twin-stick video game. Usually when you think of twin-stick games, you probably think of something like, I don't know, Enter the Gungeon, Hotline Miami, Spartan Assault, or perhaps today's most popular video game, the hip and happening Robotron 64. But usually, a major component of those games is that they're twin-stick shooters, or at least introduce a shooting element early on. That gives you a chance to fight back when levels inevitably turn into bullet hells. This game, however, is only interested in you mastering two things: melee and movement. Those are your right stick and left stick respectively. But this game also gives you two other abilities, the first being a dash with your right trigger, and the second being an instinct ability, which is more customizable and you can unlock more of throughout the game. When you're in combat, you can rotate through your different instinct abilities with the left bumper and the right bumper on your controller. And while that setup might be fine in any situation where you can engage enemies at a distance, this game does not give you that luxury. It wants you to get up close and personal and slog through battles patiently, doing what little damage you can with the tools at your disposal as the bosses throw one-hitters at you from every direction. And this is a one-hit kill game. If anything any enemy does touches you, whether it's through direct melee contact or a projectile, you die, you lose, and restart all of your progress in that fight. Now, I've played butt-naked Dark Souls builds before. I know what it's like to be a glass cannon. This is not that. This is a game where damage depends on timing, and timing depends on luck. No amount of skill, at least with the resources the game gives you at the start, can really make the game move any faster. You just have to sit there and suffer through however long it takes to break down the boss's health, which is not visibly indicated anywhere on the screen. My worst encounter with these restrictive combat systems was with a stompy-ass tree giant, which happened to be the second boss I encountered. And this level was, in fact, a bullet hell. He drops multiple bomb-like seeds on you from above, which sprout into plants that shoot out thorns in every direction. Now you might be wondering, Brian, why are you putting a game on this list of recommendations if you barely played it and you don't recommend it based on what you played? And it's because first, I don't not recommend it. And second, aesthetically, this game is probably one of the most unique things I've ever played. The fact that what you see was put together by a two-person team makes it all the more impressive. The potential for me is there, definitely, and I'm not shelving it for good. But for the time being, I'd rather spend my time playing games that feel good to play, and this one just didn't feel satisfying to me at all. I think coming off of the back of several games that give you a ton of flexibility in how you play did not help. So if you're going to play this game, please understand the limitations that you're working with. I do recommend it for the way it looks. It's, again, another visually stunning game. Apart from Remnant 2, this is one of the only plant-based horror RPGs I've ever played. Plus, something about this game gives off 2000s Newgrounds Flash game vibes, specifically the game Sonny, if you were around for that one. And I can't help but feel a little nostalgic when I see these lanky characters hovering around. So I'm going to chalk it up to me just not mastering it yet. It's worth appreciating, even if the combat feels like wiping with sandpaper dipped in rubbing alcohol, and really, don't let my opinion discourage you from trying this out. This is more indicative of the kinds of games I like than it is any testament to the actual quality of the game itself. I mean, hell, Iron Pineapple likes this game, and I have not heard a bad opinion from his channel yet, for what it's worth. That's all I've got for this list. There was a lot that I decided not to try and fit into this video. I figured 4 was enough for a first-time essay list, or whatever you want to call this. So if you've played any of these games, what are your thoughts? Did you enjoy them? Did you struggle to get into them for any reason? And is there anyone on this list that you'd like to see more of, maybe an extended playthrough? Please do not say Perennial Order. I personally can't get enough of There Is No Light, so you'll see a bit more of that from me in the future, but let me know what you think. And before I go, more importantly, what is this list missing? What niche dark fantasy media have you found that deserves a little more attention for its quality or its atmosphere? Let me know in the comments down below or on Blue Sky, where you can find me goofing around with other people who are into Souls-likes and weird video games and all of that fun stuff over there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.